Yes, my wife left me for another man after having an affair. I wanted to kill them both at first because I was so furious, but that never happened. I never meant for this to be a revenge story, but I guess it is. I'm Randy Clip's son, and I'm just your typical guy. I'm not a hunk. I was overweight for the majority of my life. That changed in high school because I played football, which is how my nickname, Chipper, came to be. They used to say that I would bring someone down if I chipped them. It was kind of expected that a guy 6 feet 3 inches and 260 pounds would play football. Even in high school, I possessed significant upper body strength and could force defensive linemen to retreat, despite my lack of athletic prowess. I had a lot of support during those 4 years of school because I played football. Firstly, even though I still had a little bit of a belly, I lost the majority of the fat that I had carried around for the majority of my life. That was more than made up for by the muscle I had gained. However, you tend to think of yourself as a fatty when you've been overweight for the majority of your life. In addition to this frame of mind, I was extremely shy due to constant bullying regarding my weight during my elementary and middle school years. I played football in high school, and now that I was in my senior year, nobody made fun of me. There were benefits associated with playing football. The girls no longer viewed me as a pariah. Don't get me wrong, I didn't attract the cheerleaders, but some girls were more than willing to go out with me. I didn't go out much until my senior year, though. That was when I met Cindy. Cindy Crawley was in my class, but I didn't really notice her until my senior year because she had transferred into our school toward the end of my junior year. I had never seen a face as beautiful as Cindy's. She was, however, overweight by a good 30 to 40 pounds. I'm not proud to admit it, but this turned off most of the boys in my class, and to be honest, I wasn't initially interested in Cindy either. It wasn't until we were paired up in chemistry that I really got to know her. For Cindy, chemistry was not complicated at all, but for me, it was. So, she helped me a lot. I would even go so far as to say that I never would have attended college if it weren't for Cindy and my failure in chemistry. Also, I discovered how gregarious and humorous she was while we were partners. I also found out that we had something in common. We had both started school late. Cindy had a congenital cardiac defect that required 1.5 years to fix. My parents chose to defer me by a year after I was born at the end of the year. That made Cindy and me both 19 years old. I eventually made the brave decision to ask her out. I believe she initially had doubts about my intentions. It was hard for me to blame her. Her early school years had been far worse than mine had been. She was constantly the target of cruel jokes and harassment. She did, however, grudgingly consent to go out with me. I just took her to the movies and then out for an ice cream soda for our simple date. We had a great time on our date, but I was too shy to try kissing her. Rather, I shook her hand and inquired about making a phone call. I could see she was thrilled. Over the course of the next few weeks, we went on multiple dates. I finally got the confidence to kiss Cindy on the cheek on our third date. Next, we moved on to necking, and I managed to reach first base. My concern for Cindy grew as I saw her more. The football season was taking an unexpected turn, while my developing romance was plodding along. Ton High, where I went to high school, was never really a football powerhouse. But everything seemed to be falling into place this season. Our star quarterback was Kirk Simmons, and our running backs were Todd and Jason Bailey. As the left tackle now, it was my job to keep Kirk's blind side safe. I think I did a pretty decent job because nobody ever fired Kirk from my end. We had fallen to Mohawk High 21-17 in our season opener. Mohawk High was a football powerhouse that never went away. We won 7 games in a row after that one to go to the regionals. We advanced to the state championship game, but Talon High defeated us 28-4. It wasn't all bad, though. We defeated Mohawk High 38-7 in the semifinals. That gave me a lot of satisfaction. I apologize, it's not often that I get to relive the glory of high school football. I was powerless to resist. Anyway, my relationship with Cindy persisted, and by prom season, we had moved up to second base. I asked Cindy out on a date right away. She gave a huge, fat kiss of acceptance and squealed with delight. Cindy went on a crash diet for the 4 weeks leading up to prom. To fit into the prom dress she had bought, she shed roughly 20 pounds. My eyes nearly burst out of their sockets when I picked her up for the prom. I thought she was gorgeous, even though she was still what most guys would consider fat. Though Cindy had always had large breasts, I had never noticed them quite as much as I did when I saw her wearing that light blue prom dress. Her breasts threatened to overflow the top of the dress, which barely held them in place. We spent the entire evening dancing with each other, making the night a dream come true for us both. When the night was almost over, I wanted to head to the parking lot with Cindy, but she had other plans, and she led me to a forest that was about 30 miles outside of the town. Cindy clarified that her uncle used to go hunting in a small cabin he owned. The cabin was really small, with just a bed, a bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a couch in front of the television. We began the evening with our customary teasing on the couch and ended up feeling content. Despite our extracurricular activities, I managed to get Cindy home 15 minutes ahead of her 2 a.m. curfew. I stayed close to Cindy for the remainder of my time in high school. Whenever we could, we had sex, but we were always careful to use a rubber. I received an offer to play football for a Division II school located 2 states away on a partial scholarship after I graduated. Cindy chose to enroll in the community college in her area. Her major was psychology, while mine was computer science. We talked about what to do about our relationship because I was leaving for school. We both agreed to end our relationship. We thought it unfair to bind the other person. I had never made a decision as difficult as this one. The feeling I had when I left Cindy behind to go to school is beyond words. She assured me that we would be together if that was our destiny. I was so afraid I would lose her. I was in excruciating pain. I nearly went home as soon as I got to Mountain Ridge University, but I was unable to do that. I would keep my word that I had made to the university. In addition, I was determined to complete my college education. I could only think of one thing to do: give my all to my schoolwork and football practices. I forced myself to keep my mind busy from the moment I woke up until I rested my head on my pillow at night. My work ethic impressed both my teachers and coaches. I took all of the classes offered, even though the coaches said not to. Being a college football player has its benefits, though they burned off the last of my fat and replaced it with muscle. With that and all the weight training, I had strength in both my upper and lower bodies. My parents had to pay the remaining amount since my scholarship was only partially funded. I was aware that they were having financial difficulties, but I was playing football and couldn't contribute. Every week I called Cindy, even though I didn't have enough money to go home. She appeared to be just as hurt as I was about our breakup. As my first year of college came to an end, both academically and in terms of football, it had gone well. By the 3rd game of the season, I was in the starting lineup. They moved me inside to play left guard because I was too slow to play tackle. We finished the season with an 8-2 record thanks to my ability to create openings for our running backs with my added strength. Academically, I made the dean's list at the end of the year. My folks were overjoyed. Cindy and I continued where we had left off during the summer. At that moment, I thought I was in love with her, or at least I thought I was. I debated whether or not we were merely lusting for each other. After giving it some thinking, I believe that it was love, at least for me, since I still harbor affection for her. During the summer, I worked and completed 3 online courses. My goal was to graduate from college as quickly as possible. Cindy and I also brought up our sex lives. Every opportunity we had, I was investigating every inch of her body. After 3 years of college, I married Cindy shortly after I graduated. Triorbit Electronics, a global software and electronics company based in Virginia, hired both of us. Cindy was employed in human resources, and I was in software development. After 2 years, we began discussing starting a family and had saved enough money to purchase a modest home. With one exception, our first 3.5 years of marriage were wonderful. We had both gained a significant amount of weight. I was topping the scales at 310 pounds, and Cindy had ballooned to 230 pounds. My height allowed me to carry the extra pounds more easily than Cindy could. Although neither of us was happy about our excess weight, we were also unable to maintain any kind of diet. I didn't care about Cindy's size, I was in love with her. After 3 years of marriage without children, we spoke with our family physician. He performed a battery of tests and determined that neither of us had any health issues, but he did advise us to reduce our weight. He thought it might aid Cindy in becoming pregnant. We thus embarked on a rigorous diet for the first time in our lives. Cindy had lost 50 pounds in 6 months. Even though I was only down roughly 25, I must confess that I cheated more than I ought to have. Cindy's weight had clearly dropped. Men were starting to show interest in her, in a way that I could see. Cindy started going to the gym 5 days a week in addition to her diet. Observing her metamorphosis made me realize I needed to get my act together. I started going to the gym with her and strictly adhering to our diet. After a year of dieting, I lost 90 pounds and Cindy lost 80. We both had a great sense of self-worth. Unfortunately, though, our weight loss was going to break my heart. Cindy started wearing clothes that was getting more and more skimpy as she lost weight. I was not happy when I started hearing some of the remarks made at work, even though at first I was really enjoying it. However, I was at a loss for words because Cindy had always been the ugly duckling. She had now transformed into a stunning swan. For me, the real issue began when Kirk Simmons was named HR director. He was a senior director in the business now. I was a senior programmer, that's all. Now that he was Cindy's boss, he was 2 levels above me. I didn't give it any thought at first. Susie Looper, a former high school cheerleader, was Kirk's wife. She was still pretty, and I had seen her at business events. If my wife hadn't asked me to dance with her while she was out with her boss, I would have hardly noticed her at all. At a Christmas party, I danced a couple of times with Susie while Kirk danced with Cindy. Admittedly, dancing alone with her got difficult for me. That wasn't a huge deal because, as I was still in my 20s, I could have had the same reaction from any attractive girl. But one thing I was pleasantly surprised about, she was not a stuck-up snob. Susie complimented us, saying, "I didn't recognize you or Cindy when Kirk and I arrived. You guys look fabulous. Cindy used to have a pretty face, but now she's really attractive. You had better watch out for her." Feeling a little embarrassed, I said, "Thank you, that's very kind. You all look amazing as well. Kirk appears exactly like he did in high school, but you look even more amazing." "Thank you, that's really sweet of you," Susie said, blushing a little as the music faded. Cindy told me she was starting birth control again 5 months before our 4th anniversary. "What about having kids?" I balked. "Quite bluntly, I've decided that I don't want any right now," she declared. "Oh, just like that you've decided?" I was upset. "We'll start a family," she said, stroking my arm. "I simply do not want to regain my weight. For a while, I want to relish my slim figure." That was when I should have known there was a problem, but I had no idea. I had total faith in Cindy. Sadly, I could throw a bus as far as I could and still trust Kirk. I had no idea that Kirk had applied full court pressure to get Cindy. Of course, she was ecstatic to hear that our high school football team's former captain was interested in her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late and then going out supposedly with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming home later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a private investigation company, and inside of a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk having sex in the office. How they got that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them cuddling at dinner. They had videos of Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. And lastly, they had pictures of them having sex on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having sex with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner, I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. "What do you have to say?" I said coldly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said in a voice just above a whisper. "Oh, your clothes just happened to fall off, and he accidentally stuck his dick in you?" I snapped. "You don't have to be crude, Randy," Cindy flared. "If you had paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." I was taken aback, and for a second, I thought that maybe I had neglected her. But then my anger flared. "Don't try to turn this back on me. I've done nothing wrong. You're the one who is having an affair. You've been caught. What do you have to say for yourself?" She looked nervously at me but said nothing. "So what are we going to do about this?" I was fighting to keep my anger under control. "Do you want to be with Kirk, or do you want to be with me?" "I love you, Randy, but I love Kirk too," she said and started to cry again. "Well, you're going to have to choose," I said, almost biting my tongue. "And I want to know by tomorrow what it's going to be. If you want to stay with me, you are never to see Kirk again. You're going to have to quit that job, and we're going to have to go to counseling." Cindy nodded. I went into our room and pulled out all of her stuff and threw it in the hall. "You can sleep in the guest room until you make up your mind." I got home early from work the next day. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table as I had the previous night. She slipped into the chair opposite me. "So, have you made up your mind?" I demanded. Tears began to run down her cheek. "You know that I love you, Randy, but I just can't give up Kirk. I love him also." I blew out a long breath to hide that my heart was breaking. "Well, you've made your choice." Cindy just nodded, which cut me worse than if someone had plunged a knife into me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between killing them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. "You picked a real winner," I said sarcastically. "Kirk and Susie just had a baby boy. It doesn't bother you that you're going to leave that kid without a father." A tiny bit of anger flashed on Cindy's face, mixed with a little bit of shame. "Kirk was planning to divorce Susie even before we got together, so just like that, you're going to throw away almost 4 years of marriage?" I asked as I continued struggling to hold back not only my temper but also the tears. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering beating Cindy to a pulp and then going to look for Kirk to break his neck. "I'm sorry if I've hurt you, Randy," she said softly, with tenderness in her voice. "I didn't intend for that to happen. I just fell so in love with Kirk, and he's in love with me. I have to be with him." My hands twitched with an unbelievable urge to break her neck at that moment, but I knew I had to hold it together. It took all of my powers of self-control to do it, but I finally did. Somewhere deep in the logical part of my brain, I knew there was nothing to be gained by physical violence. I didn't want her to know how deeply she had hurt me, and there was no way that I was going to beg her to stay. I think that is probably the worst thing that any cheated-on husband can do. It is just a sign of total weakness. "Okay," I said simply. "If you want a divorce, you've got it." A look of confusion filled her eyes, and maybe I imagined it, but also a little hurt. Perhaps she thought I was going to fight to keep her, but I knew in my heart that if she had made up her mind to leave me, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was utterly taken aback by my behavior but got up and began packing up her stuff. The next day, I went to the bank and our financial advisor. I explained what was happening and withdrew half of the funds in each account. I then opened separate accounts with my name only. I cancelled all our credit cards and applied for new ones in my name only. I stopped by a realtor friend of mine and listed our house for sale. Finally, I visited a divorce lawyer. With a lot of hatred in my heart, I made sure that Cindy was served at work. I also listed adultery as the cause. The divorce itself was relatively straightforward. Since we'd only been married about 4 years and had no kids, there was nothing to argue over. We split everything 50-50ths and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was a lot messier. He had a kid less than a year old, and Susie had never worked. He had to pay child support and alimony. One thing about Kirk's divorce that I will admit gave me some pleasure: he decided to go cheap on his lawyer. Instead of the spousal maintenance being limited to a year or 2, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't happy, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were final, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I spent the first week after the breakup totally lost. I'm not much of a drinker, so that didn't appeal to me. I was consumed for several weeks with trying to come up with some plan to get revenge on both Kirk and Cindy. I'm pretty sure every guy who has ever been cheated on does the same thing. I even started searching on the internet for information about how ex-husbands got revenge on their former wives and lovers. I was in a really dark place. I even bought a gun. Then I began reading story after story about guys who had gotten revenge. At first, my only thoughts of revenge involved violence. Then I started planning to destroy their property. But I quickly realized that both of those ideas would just blow back on me. They were stupid ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and a bunch of other silly ideas. The more stories I read about revenge, the more I realized how ridiculous most of them were. I found no way to gain the revenge I wanted. Finally, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor talked to me for almost 2 hours. He explained to me that the hurt from my wife's betrayal wouldn't go away with any kind of revenge. No matter how much I hurt my former wife or her new husband, the pain would still be there. The pastor's advice was really pretty simple for a person with my kind of pain. He told me that only time and distance would heal my heart. Even though I wasn't sure I believed him, I realized that being near Cindy and not being able to be with her would tear open the wound every time I saw her. I also realized that the pastor was right about one thing: revenge wouldn't stop the hurt. So, I took his advice. That meant I had to put distance between Cindy and me. My opportunity came when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised big profits, but there was a downside: our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's totally classified, so I can't even begin to tell you about it. Suffice it to say that it was going to put the United States head and shoulders above the Russians and the Chinese. That is, of course, if my company could deliver. The rumor going around was that the project was seriously behind and over budget. Usually, no one worried too much about government contracts, but this one was different. Indeed, there were huge profits to be made. However, there was great risk for the company. Unlike other government projects, during this one, no progress payments would be made. While this software and the accompanying electronic components were being developed, the company would also have to pay tremendous penalties if they didn't deliver on time. In fact, if the company didn't successfully finish the project as per the contract, there was a strong possibility that it would go under. As one of the senior software designers in the company, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. All the other designers didn't want to touch this project with a 10-foot pole. In fact, most of them were updating their resumes and looking to jump ship. If you took it on and failed, not only would you be fired, but the company would probably tank. The stigma of that failure would stay with you for a long, long time. But at that point in my life, I figured, what the hell? I didn't have much to lose. Now that I was divorced, I had very modest needs. If I lost my job, so what? I'd get by. Plus, I had just learned that Cindy was now pregnant. That was like a dagger to my heart. I had always believed that Cindy and I would one day have a family of our own. I looked at all the data that they had provided me on this Air Force project. It was clear to me that the direction they had taken would never work. I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California. I was going to put about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. As I had done my first year in college, I immersed myself in work. My days were long, sometimes 20 hours at a stretch, which didn't give much time to think about Cindy. I fired 3/4 of the programmers and all of the engineers working on the electronic components. I brought in new people. I literally scrapped everything they had done to date. Even though our deadline was only 11 months away, I didn't know anything about engineering, but I had brought some of the most creative engineers in the company to work with me. I even poached some really excellent engineers from rival companies. When I explained what I wanted them to build, they were skeptical. But when I told them why I wanted the electronic components built that way, they were stunned. They suddenly realized how simple my idea was. However, I then had to make the software work. Slowly but surely, we put together a program that I felt good about. But it wasn't until 3 weeks before we had to deliver our product to the military that I knew we had done it. Our first test combining the software and the electronic components showed a 96% success rate. And as I scanned the 4% that hadn't worked, I knew that they were easy fixes. Once it was revealed that our program worked, the company stock shot up over 300 points in a couple of months. Then the Defense Department announced that they were expanding our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines. We were talking about billions of dollars in profits. But it didn't stop there. I realized that we could tweak the program downward, and it would have multiple commercial applications as well. Basically, we stripped all of the classified information out, and it proved to be an excellent platform for all sorts of practical applications. The list of things we could adapt to this program seemed endless. After that success, I was promoted to a senior vice president and put in charge of developing those commercial applications. Over the years that followed, I frequently had to return to the Virginia home office. I didn't run into either Kirk or Cindy during these visits. Even though I didn't think it would affect me at all, I didn't want to be bothered. I had nothing to say to either of them. After all this time, the pastor who had given me the advice about putting time and distance between a heartbreak had been 100% right. I had moved on. During one of my visits, I ran into Kelly Bailey. She had been a cheerleader back at Captain High. She and Susie had been best friends. I knew that she had married Jason Bailey and had had a son before I found Cindy. I had always had a crush on Kelly. She was the prettiest cheerleader, but Kelly had such a warm way about her that it was impossible not to like her. In high school, she had been voted most popular. Kelly had aged some, but was still quite attractive. Physically, she was the polar opposite of Cindy. While Cindy had short blonde hair and was overly well endowed, Kelly was petite with long black hair. She stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, and her breasts, while proportional, were considerably smaller than Cindy's. One thing they had in common was a smile that radiated warmth. I was stunned that she recognized me. I was in a grocery store getting a few things because I was supposed to make a presentation to the board of directors. Formal updates with the board always meant I'd be in town for a week. The company had several apartments for executives that came from out of the area. They were furnished, but there was never any food in them. "Randy, is that you?" Kelly called to me as I was trying to decide which frozen dinners to buy. I immediately recognized her and blushed slightly when she called my name again. I guess I still had a little crush on her even though she had a few gray hairs and a few small wrinkles. "Kelly." I smiled as she stopped her basket next to mine. "I'm flattered that you recognized me." "I wouldn't have," she admitted, "except that Susie pointed you out when she came to have lunch with me at Trialbit." You work at Triobit? I was truly stunned. She smiled and nodded. I've been there for about 6 years. I work in marketing. I was surprised to discover that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a little guilty that I didn't know that. However, I had almost nothing to do with marketing, so I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt as though I should have known. How are you doing? I finally asked to cover my discomfort. I'm doing as well as can be expected, she said, with a sadness in her voice. I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real turd. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty light considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't have a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hound him for it each month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son, Scott. I get furious when I think about it. I'm really sorry, Kelly, I apologized. I always knew Jason was a bit of a wild man, but I thought he would settle down once he got married. I paused for a moment and looked into Kelly's beautiful emerald green eyes. I didn't really know what to say next, so I decided to just commiserate with her. I guess you know that my wife and I are divorced. Cindy decided to chase after Todd, not me, I explained. No, Randy, Kelly shook her head. It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it. I guess I can't argue with that, I admitted, but it takes two to tango. You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you? She asked, surveying my cart. Yeah, I'm afraid so, I nodded. I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle. Well, look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good. I almost turned her down, but the thought of a home-cooked meal was something I couldn't pass up. If it's not an inconvenience, I wouldn't mind having a real meal. That evening was delightful. Kelly made me loaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was fun having someone to talk to. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, like I was. We had fun talking about the team and their prospects for the coming season. I was a real fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company paid for them because I would take prospective customers to the games. When I didn't have any customers, I'd invite my buddies. And if I couldn't find anyone at all to go with me, I'd go by myself. I'd give the other 3 tickets away, usually to people who were trying to buy from a scalper. I wish I could go to a game someday, Scotty said wistfully. I can make that happen, I said impulsively. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I realized that I had overstepped my bounds and quickly tried to fix it. That is, of course, if your mother will approve of it. Scotty looked over at his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, "We'll discuss it." At the end of the evening, I apologized. I'm sorry about the offer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was out of my mouth before I realized what I was saying. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him going to a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him. She stood there looking at me with piercing eyes. It was then that it hit me that I'd made another faux pas. I immediately tried to correct that one, only to create yet another. The invitation applies to you also. After a moment's pause, I stuttered, I'd get separate rooms for us. You and Scotty would be in one, and I'd be in the other. I could feel my face burning at my stupidity, but all that Kelly did was smile. You are the sweetest man, she said with a chuckle. Your expression is priceless. I breathed a sigh of relief. I really didn't want to offend Kelly. I truly enjoyed her company and was hoping that we could get together from time to time. Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to. Kelly studied me for a long moment, then she smiled. Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but I never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me. And I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty. Over the following year, I would call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we would get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door, I was watching a local sports station as they did an analysis of the Bucs game. She was the last person I expected to come knocking on my door at that time of night. "Is something wrong?" I asked with real concern. "Is Scotty all right?" "No, nothing's wrong," she replied with a smile. "And Scotty is sleeping soundly, happy that his Bucs are going to the playoffs. I just was hoping that we could have a drink and talk." I glanced down at my t-shirt and boxer shorts. I said, "Let me go get some pants on," and I went out the door to get them. They weren't where I thought I had thrown them onto the chair in the corner. "No need," Kelly replied, pushing open the door and going inside. I searched frantically for my pants, but they weren't on the chair. Neither could I find them on the floor. Kelly started to giggle as I started to look around the room. My face was red as a fire engine now. "I can level the playing field if you feel uncomfortable," grinned Kelly as she undid her skirt and allowed it to drop to the ground. "We're both wearing our underwear now. Come sit down and mix me a drink." I went to the minibar and got out 2 Coke cans and 2 tiny bottles of rum. I'm not much of a drinker, but I do like rum and Coke occasionally. Kelly got up on my bed and sat down cross-legged while I was mixing the drinks. It was difficult not to ogle her white lace-trimmed underwear. I gave Kelly her drink and then looked around for a spot to sit. Kelly could tell I was having trouble when she noticed my head darting around. She gave the bed next to her a pat. "Please take a seat here." "I'm not a biter," she declared. I nodded, still flushed, and took a seat beside her. I quickly swallowed a large portion of my drink. I felt the rum moving through me, and I started to unwind. After we had finished our drinks and chatted for a while, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. I waited for her to stand up as she shook her head. I assumed she would return to her son. That was a huge mistake on my part. I threw the cups in the trash can and went back to sitting, not knowing what to do. Kelly gave me a kiss on the lips when I did. It zapped my body with electricity. It was soft and swift. She grinned at my surprise. "I've been waiting on your kisses for months. I assumed you still saw me as that unreachable cheerleader from high school." Kelly remarked, "Let me tell you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had thoroughly read me. I had wanted to kiss her so many times but refrained out of fear. I was unwilling to risk losing her as a friend. I bent down to give her a kiss. We licked each other for a long while, feeling every crevice of their mouths. She had a very sweet taste. I told her after we split up, "You are a beautiful and amazing woman." Then Kelly rested her head on my breast. I had sex with Cindy for the first time, but that night was even better. After that night, Kelly and I got engaged after 6 months. The news that I was going to be Scotty's father delighted him. That night, we got married a year later. Jason had been every bit the turd Kelly said he was. He was very resentful of me and hardly spoke to his son. Jason remained close to Kirk, and he had to tell me how happy they were and what wonderful sex Kirk and Cindy were having whenever he visited Kelly's apartment when I was there. He probably believed that would make me envious. I merely listened without responding. What I did find out was that Cindy had quit her work to become a full-time mother, but Kirk was still in charge of the company's human resources division. The fact that Kirk and Cindy now had 3 children surprised me a little, but it stopped bothering me completely. I once made the mistake of telling Kelly to forget about it after overhearing her berating Jason on the phone for not sending the support payment. I'm more than willing to pay for Scotty's needs. Kelly sternly said, "You need to stay out of this. I'll be damned if I'm letting him get away with not paying his child support even though he ignores his son. Scotty owns that money." I withdrew right away. I was going to become the company's executive vice president that December. The Washington Convention Center was to host the Christmas party, where the announcement was to be made. 400 or 500 people were expected to attend. Kelly was thrilled, but I was a little embarrassed that they were going to make a big deal out of my promotion at this event. She told me, "You deserve this recognition," and chastised me for my whining. "I'm practically as familiar with that company's personnel as you are, and they've told me countless tales of how this business wouldn't survive without you. They also informed me that you will succeed Mel as CEO when he leaves in the following year." "Maybe," I replied, "but it's not important. My spouse is the most stunning woman on the planet, and I have a surprise in store for you. Remember when that rubber slipped while we were doing it in Kansas City?" She smiled. I gave a nonsensical smile after nodding. "You don't mean?" She nodded her head, her smile growing. "I am indeed pregnant. I will never let you go, I promise you." She threw me into a tight hug, and I knew that she would have torn my clothes off and we would have gotten into serious physical altercations all night long if we hadn't had to go to the party. Even though it hurt to think about it, I knew we would have a great time after the party. I'll be honest, I'm not much of a party animal. They have long since lost their appeal because I have to attend so many of them. Kelly seems to still like them, but only when I'm with her. She still exudes an aura that attracts attention. After engaging in a number of dances, we were about to head back to our table when we happened to run into Kirk and Cindy. They arrived late, followed by Jason and his date, Kathy, who was a stunning young woman. I was really taken aback. At least 30 pounds had dropped off Cindy, and Kirk attempted to hide his little potbelly with his coat jacket. Naturally, Jason remained toned and trim, but I surmised that he was still developing. Just as I was wondering what to do, someone started speaking on the public address system. "Could I have your attention for just a moment?" It dawned on me that it was Triorbit CEO Mel Stanton. "I swear I won't make a lengthy speech. As the majority of you are aware, Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, retired 3 months ago, and we have been searching for a replacement. I knew immediately who I wanted, but the board took 3 months to decide. They did, in fact, agree with me after months of interviewing dozens of candidates. We are happy to announce that our new executive vice president is a member of our own team. He's been a great asset all along, and it's about time he gets his due. I present to you Randy Clipson, our incoming executive vice president." Abruptly, I was the center of attention, and the entire room erupted in loud applause. Kelly drew me in close and planted a long, intense kiss on my forehead. The party went back to normal when the commotion subsided, and I turned to see Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date standing there. I had no idea how to respond to them. Kirk's face was full of jealousy, and Jason looked angry. But as I looked at Cindy, I noticed a look of loss and sadness. Kelly knew exactly what to say and do, while I was clueless. "Kirk, Cindy, Jason, it's great to see you all." She gave them each a hug. She turned to shake hands with Kathy. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Kathy." I followed my wife's example. I shook hands with Kathy, Jason, and Kirk and gave Cindy a quick squeeze. After a little while of conversation, the music began to play. Kelly unexpectedly said, "Randy, how about you and Cindy have a dance, and I'll have a dance with my ex-husband." "Why don't Kirk and you two dance too, Kathy?" I gave Kelly a questioning glance, but all she did was smile condescendingly. So Cindy and I danced. "How have you and Kirk been doing?" There was nothing more I could think of to ask. "Not very well," was her response. "I believe a divorce is imminent. Kirk has probably been unfaithful to me." I said, "I'm very sorry to hear that." "Are you really, Randy?" She gave me a very skeptical look. I figured you'd say something like "Wit serves you right." I responded, I would never say that, at first taken aback by the remark, but then I realized that there had actually been a time when I most likely would have said something along those lines. To tell the truth, I probably would have said something similar if you had come to me when we first broke up. I couldn't hate you, though. It hurt to lose you because you were my first love. However, I have moved on and so has life. Not long afterward, the music stopped, and Cindy's face started to well up with tears. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you, and I can never undo it. I felt so bad for Cindy as I watched her turn to leave. Kelly put her arm around me and I leaned in to give her a kiss. "How was your dance with Jason?" I inquired. "He's still a jerk," she replied, grinning. "He made a genuine attempt to flirt with me. He informed me that he was eager to return and that he was ready to settle down." "Why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world?" I asked him, laughing. I saw Cindy walk over to their table and take a seat. This distance did not hide the tears from my sight. It looked like Kirk and Jason were having a heated argument. I would venture to guess that Kirk attempted to initiate contact with Jason. I recalled how hurt I had been when Cindy had left. That kind of thing never really goes away. It leaves a scar, just like an improper cut. I also remembered how much that period of time had consumed me with plotting retaliation. The pastor had been correct all along. I could never have found relief from my pain through retaliation. Yes, distance and time were the things that had healed me. As I stated at the outset, I had succeeded in exacting revenge even though I had given up on the notion. I took my retribution in the only way that matters to a person who has been betrayed. I was living a happy, fulfilling life with love. If you've made it this far, listener, please click the subscribe button. It will be very beneficial.